Hey everybody, this is Charlie from Be With. I hope you're doing well. Today's conversation is with Arthur Kilmurray, who is one of the most innovative yoga teachers in all of America. He studied with BKS Iyengar, and although that's what he's known for, being an Iyengar yoga teacher, he's really one of the most comprehensively knowledgeable somatic explorers of both the inner world and the outer world. And it's a pleasure to speak to him. He's a dear friend and a mentor to me. And I'm so excited to share this conversation with Arthur Kilmurray. Thanks for watching. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much for making time here.
Charlie, thank you for motivating and pushing and getting your work out there. It's important in this time to communicate across as many levels and layers of reality as we possibly can as we humans trying to navigate this crazy time we're living in.
Yeah, I agree. So tell me more about, you mentioned practice is something really important to talk about right now. So let's dive right into practice.
Yeah, I believe, for years and years and years, I've had what is called a spiritual practice, which I don't know how I fell into it. I mean, I'm not sure. I was raised in the Catholic Church where there was no practice. You just basically went to church and followed the rituals and believed what they told you. And there was no personal engagement as far as, diving into your own internal states and your own personal internal psychology and emotions. It was just something on the outside. And I was saying that in the modern world where we're all overstimulated and our autonomic nervous system is on hyper overdrive and our fear response is being triggered left, right, and center. What a spiritual practice does, from my perspective, is gives you an opportunity to self-monitor your own internal state, to self-monitor your own autonomic nervous system as a starting point, to be actually stepping back and looking at what's happening and trying to make sense of what's real and what's delusionary, where we or I fit into the world. What is it that I can contribute to this process? How can I make sense of it? So all these are components to a spiritual practice. They give us access to information coming from a multiplicity of levels of reality, and helps us integrate ourselves into the overall scheme of things.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you come from a sports and science background. You're not the traditional, you just have a diverse background when it comes to spirituality. You went to MIT and you studied physics or
Well,
science.
I was studying biology, but I actually took a course with a gentleman named Houston Smith, who is he passed away just not a couple of years ago, an expert on comparative religions. And he taught a course on Eastern religion, which covered Hinduism, Buddhism, Shintoism, Confucianism, the whole spectrum. And that was a radical shift in my awareness. I didn't expect to run into that at MIT, but hey, you take what happens. Simultaneously with that was the Vietnam War and the eruption or immersion of psychotropic drugs onto the scene. So studying physics shifted to wanting to study consciousness. I had this fascinating experience of, if you want to integrate all these phenomena, I was at my MIT fraternity. Was back in the day when the Bruins were hot. And I was watching a Bruins game upstairs, and one of my dear friends had a small black and white TV on his desk up in the third floor of the annex. And I was up watching a Bruins game, smoked the joint, was watching the game. At intermission, I looked around, and on his desk was a copy of The Way of Zen by Alan Watts. So literally, I just picked it up and opened it at a random page and started reading. And within 1 or 2 minutes, this what we call satori, a revelation occurred, which says, he's describing what I'm experiencing. How does he know that? What is that link between what I'm reading on the words of the page, which comes from, Alan Watts was a contemporary, back in the 60s and 70s, but describing something that's been around for thousands of years, describing exactly what's going on in my mind, in my head. And I go, I got to know more about this. Right around that time, the Houston's class popped up. So I said, okay, this is not coincidence. This is some karma here. So I started taking Houston's course, and it turned out that part of the study of Houston's course was studying, the Vedanta, Indian spirituality. And another karmic coincidence, my fraternity was in the Back Bay of Boston, happened to be 3 doors down from the Vedanta Society of Boston. So I started hanging out there and studying with the Swami. His name has come, Vivekananda, Sarvagatananda. Anyway, so I started studying the Gita with a Vedanta teacher literally 3 doors down from me, 22 or 21 or whatever it was. And I just suddenly went from being a scientist to being immersed in consciousness and in ancient studies of consciousness. It was fascinating. But in the early days, it was basically a head thing. I mean, I was fascinated by the ideas and the concepts and the philosophies, and they all made perfect sense to me. I could resonate on a multiplicity of levels what they were describing, and they were linking to something that was going on in here. But it wasn't for another 6 or 7 years, 1978, when I ran across a yoga practice. I had a sedentary job. I was sitting at a desk. I actually got to travel a lot, but my body was going to seed. As a 28, I was an ex-jock who felt I was getting out of shape. So a couple of friends suggested I should take a yoga class, which I said, well, whatever. I have no idea what that means, but that sounds interesting. So 2 friends and I signed up, and the only class we could get into was an intermediate level Iyengar class. PKS Iyengar is a well-known teacher who taught a fairly rigorous style of yoga. And I remember walking into the class, and I vividly have a sense of saying, okay, this is interesting, and watching the teacher go into triangle pose. And I said, okay, and my body just had no idea how to do that. It was like, just what she did and what my body could do was like miles and miles apart. So I said, this is really unusual. And what was even stranger is that the next day or 2 days later, I woke up and saw and play that I didn't know existed. I mean, it's like it had challenged me in a very interesting way. And that seemed to be the kind of the final piece in the puzzle of, if I'm going to learn spirituality, I need to embody it. I need to actually take it into my body and make sense of it on that level. And then, within 2 years, I was in India studying with Iyengar, where I learned how to practice. And that was basically what his great gift to me is. What does it mean to practice? He was incredibly disciplined. I mean, with his youth, he would practice 10 hours a day, which is, mind-boggling that you could put that much energy and time into a very intense practice. But he was an intense guy.
How do you think of practice more broadly? I mean, it's not just a yoga practice, right? Is it some kind of daily discipline or?
Well, it involves discipline when you have to commit yourself to a period of time. The practice in a very general sense is I'm trying to learn to play the saxophone. So for me to play, I have to put X amount of minutes, hours, a day, a week into it in order to get my hands to do what they're supposed to do and get my mouth to do what it's supposed to do and to learn the theory behind it. And if I don't do that, nothing happens. So I have to make a choice to invest time and energy into doing that. So the first part in developing a practice is having the discipline to do it. Whether it's sitting on a meditation cushion, sitting on a yoga mat, going to the gym, going to the club to swim or work out, picking up the instrument and playing, sitting down at the piano, whatever it is, you have to make a disciplined decision. The second step, and this comes right out of the Yoga Sutras, which is quite fascinating. The beginning of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, his second chapter is on practice. First chapter is a little more advanced. The first chapter jumps right into absorption and samadhi. And the second chapter says, if you're not ready for that, we got to tell you how to get started. So the first part is to develop a discipline. The second part is to develop discriminating awareness. There was an example, I'm playing my horn. I have to be able to tell, no, that's flat, that's sharp. My finger, I'm going too fast, I'm going too slow. I have a metronome that I need to use. I have a tuner. I mean, I have all these external aids that help me. But at some point in time, I have to be able to discriminate between what feels right and what is right and what's off center within the music. Within the body, it's a similar thing. I have to know if I'm aligned. Am I doing damage to my body? Does this feel good? Is the energy going in the right direction? Is there something off with that? When it comes to meditation, it's a similar thing. Is that there's all this stuff going on in my mind. What do I do with it? How do I make sense of it? How do I start to discriminate between this is helpful? I want to nurture this. This is a pathological habit. This is a pathological thought pattern, emotional pattern that keeps getting me into trouble. Can I recognize that, number one, discriminate, and then develop some skills around working with it? So that discriminating practice basically is a combination of developing skillful means as well as spending the time to pay attention. The third part, which is the more interesting and fascinating one, is once you develop this discriminant awareness, you begin to recognize this in a natural innate intelligence that's flowing through you. And you don't have to add to it. You don't have to do anything to it. You're not responsible for it. You have to just allow it. You have to kind of get out of the way and let it move through you. And the third part is literally gradually more and more and more allowing this larger intelligence, whatever you want to call it, to actually start to move through you. And you realize that it is you. Again, that's part of the more advanced stuff, as you recognize that it's not the small self that's making the decisions. It's a much larger component, which keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger until it's the whole universe. And you begin to realize that, you are one with the universe in the sense the universe is moving through you. And that's a revelation that comes every moment. And we forget, it's very easy to slip back into the ego. I need to do this. I need to figure this out. So the third part is really, it's not an easy thing to do, to keep allowing something larger to happen. I often fall back to, okay, I got to start all over again. I'm getting distracted. So I need a little more discipline. I need more discrimination because I'm falling into old habits that I don't recognize. I haven't discriminated that those are actually habits that are taking me off center. They're familiar, they're comfortable, and I go, wait a minute, how did I end up over here? Well, I stopped paying attention. I didn't even realize it was a habit.
Yeah, I love this context you're creating, because you're creating a much larger context for what practice is. Most people might think, oh, I have to go sit down and meditate for 10 minutes, or I have to do yoga. And somehow it's jumped into this domain of a higher intelligence moving through us and guiding us.
Well, it becomes a larger and larger process as you start to see what is. If you start to, what is actually taking place in this moment? What is happening here? What is happening here as I look out into the world? What is happening here as I observe my own internal states? I just ran across an interesting description that comes out of the Andrew Cohen world. It describes the three phenomena that are fairly universal, less obvious in the Eastern disciplines. But it's one of those wonderful sound bites. And it's described as wake up, grow up, clean up. So the waking up is the recognizing that this much larger force of the universe flowing through you. There's something much bigger than the ego. There's something much bigger than the smaller self. And you find it in stillness, in your meditation practice, or even in your life. You don't need to be in meditation. You can be walking in the beach or in a forest or in a place where nature is very powerful. And you're overtaken by a sense of awe. And the depth of that awe is just a stillness. It's like everything is standing still. Time stops. And everybody's had this experience. They don't necessarily recognize it as something that's their natural state. We tend to assume it's a transient phenomenon, and then we try and get back to it. But the waking up is recognizing that's always present. That is our true nature. That is our fundamental essence, our Buddha nature. It never goes anywhere. It can't be taken away. It can't be given to us. We can't go to a guru and have him hand it to us, right? Nor can anyone take us away from us. So that's the waking up part. And we often wake up and then forget. We wake up and forget. Adyashanti has a wonderful term he calls unabiding awakening. So we wake up, we don't stay there. One of the obstacles that are given in the Yoga Sutra is something similar, is a failure to sustain the ground. You reach a certain level of understanding, but you can't stay there. You fall back. So that's an interesting thing. So that's the waking up part. Landing in true nature, landing in stillness, landing in the infinite. Stepping into that place where we are one with everything. It's just a knowing. It comes from the heart. It's the heart opening. And everybody has this. I mean, everybody is true nature. Everybody has true nature as their source. This is not something about going to school and learning about it. It's ever present. Growing up is recognizing that we have a need to develop our emotional reality, our emotional internal state. And this is where all of the trouble in the world comes from, our emotional dysfunctionality, our emotional dysregulation. On the simplest level, to use Ken Wilber's model, or it's not his model, but it's a universal model. We basically start off as an infant with no ego, but we're totally undifferentiated. There is no other, and we cannot function in the world because we don't have a separate entity. We don't have an organizing function that allows us to gradually function. So we're completely and totally dependent on mother, parent, caregiver. Out of that emerges the original sense of self we call the ego. at which point the whole world is me, and the whole world needs to correspond to what my needs and desires are. If I want it, I have to have it, If I don't want it, I have to get rid of it. And that's the only reality I live. Call it the terrible twos in our growth and development process. And then we gradually emerge to slowly emerge to a larger one. There are other kids in my neighborhood, there are other people in my family that I'm part of a larger group. So I call this a tribal sense. I am my tribe. And historically, humans went through this phase. We went through this phase where we were very tribal in our earliest days. And the tribe was all important. But anybody who wasn't in my tribe was other. And they were dangerous and threatening, and we'd have to go to war with them, or they threatened us for our food source or whatever. And you see that in the tribal nature of kids. They band in groups, and then they look for enemies to fight. They look for other gangs to go to battle with. From the tribal sense, we go to more of an ethnocentric sense. So again, we keep getting bigger. The sense of self keeps getting larger, only now it's my religion, my ethnic group, my racial group. And then anybody who's not part of that is other. They're alien, they're different, they're separate. I have no relationship to them. I don't understand who they are. And at the worst, they're threatening. And from that ethnocentric group, which is basically, we're locked in the ethnocentric world right now. Various countries fighting each other, various tribal groups fighting each other. The fourth emergent is world-centric. And all of a sudden we begin to recognize that, I am a human being, every other human being on the planet is like me, in spite of their racial group, in spite of their religious beliefs, in spite of the country of origin or whatever, we share a common humanity. And that's the beginning of the heart opening. That's where we go from a brain ego sense to the heart opening. As a culture, we're in the middle of that. That's the culture wars that are taking place right now. That heart-centric, world-centric is trying to push into the collective group consciousness. And it's being resisted tremendously by the tribal consciousness and the ethnocentric consciousness. They don't want any part of that. It's very threatening to them. But to go beyond that, you go to world-centric, you go to what I call cosmocentric, where it's just not the world, it's not just other human beings, it's like everything, all of creation, all of life is me. The whole universe is me. So there's kind of a spiral of self expanding into larger and larger and larger and larger components. At each point along the way, we get stuck. There are various emotional components that prevent us from going one to the other. And those components are under what is called the cleanup, which are basically trapped energy in our developmental psyche that's caught in what's called trauma. And trauma is basically energy that's stuck and not moving. And it's not available to us to keep growing. It's like all of a sudden we don't have any food. So the nervous system has places where it stores energy that, trauma, the dilemma with trauma is that trauma is usually stored pain, grief, and suffering. And it's stored because in the particular moment that it arises, we don't have the resources to handle it. We don't have the resources to know what to do with it. Often comes in early childhood infancy, where we're overwhelmed by the world. We don't know how to deal with it, so we basically repress it. And we can grow up, but our emotional maturity is going to be stuck in the fact that we may still have trauma. That trauma may be triggered by external circumstances. So we may go into fight or flight for no other reason than we have no idea what's going on outside of us, but our internal state says, I'm triggered. This is one of the major things with our whole racial issue right now. Both sides are triggered by the other. And for obvious reasons, the 500-year history of slavery and our ethnocentric white supremacy is created a huge amount of not only personal but collective trauma. In order to heal that, in order to work through that trauma, you have to be able to handle the pain and the grief that's associated with that. So cleaning up the toxic waste dump of our psyches is not something you just jump into and throw it all open, because we don't have, we're not emotionally and psychologically strong enough to handle the whole thing. So Peter Levine, the gentleman who did a lot of work with trauma, and he's had other people help him. But one of the models he uses in somatic experiencing, I think, is the practice he uses. But where we want to encounter trauma, what you have to do first is build resources. Because when you encounter a place of trauma in your body, you tend to go into emotional dysregulation, where all of a sudden you don't know whether you're in the past or the future. You lose contact with the present moment, and your nervous system is in fight or flight. And you literally are unable to recognize what's actually happening around you. You're basically lost in a memory that you think is the present moment. So what you do is you have somebody who's navigating you, somebody who has a very stable emotional nervous system who can guide you, whether it's a parent or a therapist, a spiritual teacher, who could hold the space and allow you to begin to feel some of those sensations, emotions, feel fear or pain, and begin to release them a little at a time. And what he calls titrating, where you may just take one drop of the trauma and say, can I incorporate this one drop? Can I take 2 drops and incorporate that? Can I take 3 drops and incorporate that? And gradually the trauma is transformed into just raw energy that you can then use for your growth and development. You can take that on the spiral up to the next level.
In your experience, what motivates an individual or yourself to embark on this spiral of development? Is it coming from a place of suffering and loss or woundedness, or is it aspirational towards some?
I think both are possible. I think intuitively we have what Adyashanti says is that life itself has the urge to wake up. So it's a fundamental aspect of true nature to, 1, discover its own transcendent state, and 2, to be able to embody it. So those are just biological, those are cosmological imperatives that come with being alive. But oftentimes suffering is one of the things that pushes us to say, I need to do something about this. But it's sometimes just curiosity. For me, it wasn't suffering, it was curiosity. There's a certain amount of karma involved in this. I woke up, I was born a very curious person. I was in a very supportive and nurturing environment. I wasn't exposed to trauma. I wasn't exposed to abuse. I wasn't exposed to war. I mean, I had a very special, spoiled, easy environment. So, but I think other people do. They hit a. I think you hear the story of Eckhart Tolle, who was in an acute depression. And his depression was so great, he was basically thinking about suicide. And he just said, I hate myself so much, I think I'll kill myself. And then a little trigger in his brain goes, I hate myself. How can there be 2 of me? And that just one insight just boom, blew open all of his karmic issues. And that was his awakening. That was his huge awakening. As soon as he recognized there can't be 2 of me, what does that mean? There's 2 of me, and it's just Byron Katie had a similar thing. I think she was flirting with alcoholism and trauma and whatever, and somehow had an absolute 180-degree turn that shifted her life into a huge opening. And those are 2 extreme cases. They went from being traumatized to just boom, living in the infinite effortlessly and being very wise and insightful communicators of what it means to live from that place. What I find fascinating is that they're totally different, radically different personalities, totally different approaches, but it's the same phenomenon, which means that each of us have our own unique perspective on this process. We each have something unique to contribute. It's not about becoming a clone. It's not like we all become the same person once we wake up. It's just the opposite. The universe wants to express itself in as many unique ways as possible. Each of us gets to be a unique way of, a unique vehicle for the universe to express itself.
There's a sense that by becoming by emptying oneself to a certain degree, by recognizing oneself as everything and nothing, one can become more of oneself or one's true self. Is that paradox something you see?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's another component to it that there's the word soul, S-O-U-L, which is one of those interesting words. And to me, the soul is the voice of awakening. That is, it's not, to say it's embodied isn't right, because I think it exists outside the body and it contributes, but it definitely exists in the world of form. And it's the way in which the universe communicates to your individual, come back to the word soul again, we get to get into this recursive thinking. But there's an aspect where you begin to tap into why you're here, who you are, what your role is in the universe, what your skills are, what your gifts are, what your challenges are, what you need to work on. There's a deep part of you that knows all of this stuff. And I think a lot of the awakening is not just the transcendent infinite, but the soul piece, which is your own unique set of skills, weaknesses, challenges, things you can do.
Yeah,
and to be able to access that, to be able to tap into that, and to be able to trust it, because it is a voice. It's a voice inside of you, you know, along with the voice of your mother and your father and your whoever else, baseball coach, what other people's voices are in your head, your spiritual teacher. A lot of voices contribute to your growth and development. Not all of them helpful, not all of them healthy.
So in that sense, the soul is a channel for the universe to communicate with itself in the form of us.
In a very unique way.
And what have you found to be, I mean, in my experience, certainly the work of Carl Jung has been really central in this soul piece through looking at dreams and the psyche. Have you found other ways in your life that the soul communicates effectively or methodologies to interact with it?
Not specifically. To me, it's a very personal thing. It's when I know I'm in touch with myself, I'm doing my practice and I'm getting distracted and this voice comes, settle down. This we need to work on. And it's when I align myself with what my individual journey is, it goes, you got it, stay with it.
How does it show up? That nod?
Insight. I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, it's just a knowing. It's just something that says yes. The part of you that says yes to being alive, yes to being aligned. It says no when you're going off center. I mean, it's almost like a very simple thing. It says don't go there. Don't take that choice. You know, you do something else. It's kind of looking at it. Some people call it guardian angel, maybe one aspect of that. But a guardian angel tends to be something that's outside of you. So to me, there's nothing outside of you. Your guardian angel is you. It's not separate from you. If you want to go into that particular realm of describing the phenomena. But to me, it's just an inner voice that says yes or no. I mean, it's very simple. It's not nuanced. I mean, it doesn't get into complexity. It has nothing to do with theory or beliefs or arguments or whatever. It just says, yes, this is going in the right direction. No. It may not tell you what to do. It doesn't necessarily say, you need to do this. But when you start to find it, it goes yes. When you start to drift off, it goes no. And then the rest of it is mystery. The rest of it is.
Well, we're resonators in a way. There's this property of resonance is so powerful. If we can listen to it, like the way I met you, it's very strange. I don't know if I think I must have told you this years ago, but I had taken a yoga class at the Iyengar Center in New York, and one of the teachers, I really liked him, and his bio basically attributed everything he knew to you. I was like, who's this guy? This Arthur guy is moving through this other guy. And I want to find out who this Arthur guy is. I went to your website, and your website is this amazing resource. And I just immediately felt this resonance, or this yes, as you're calling it, a yes with you.
Yeah.
And that led to our relationship. And it's so mysterious what's actually happening there.
Well, I had a similar experience. Is that, I was teaching at the Iyengar Yoga Institute in San Francisco, right? And it was a fairly large space. There was a big yoga center, and then they would go up the stairs to the little office and a bulletin board. In the back room, there was another smaller yoga center, and there was a bulletin board that would have, periodic notices, and mostly it's the local teachers. And I walked by, and I glance at it periodically. But one day I walked by, and something caused me to stop. And it was a notice of a workshop taught by a woman in Chicago. Her name was Bea Briggs. And her basically said that her major teachers in life were Ramanand Patel, who was my teacher at the time, who was an engineer. So he was basically the scientist that spoke to my scientific mind. And then then a cosmologist. And I go, wait a minute, how could a cosmologist be interested in a yoga teacher? So I literally wrote her a letter and said, who is this cosmologist? What are you talking about, right? And she wrote me back and says, well, this is this guy named Brian Swim. And I said, who is he? And he says, well, he's just the guy. He's, where is he? And he says, well, he's right near you. So I literally wrote a letter to Brian. She sent me his address. I wrote to Brian. And Brian says, oh, by the way, I'm teaching a class about 2 miles from your house, starting in a couple of weeks. You should probably take it. And that's how you can understand it. And through that, I met Brian, I met Thomas Berry. And that was one of those moments where you walk by and you look at something on the bulletin board, that something catches your eye and something pulls your attention, and your whole life changes. Just for that one. So I call that synchronicity or something like that. But I think that's part of our soul's radar, is constantly looking for things very unconsciously, looking for things that, you know, will resonate, as you say, resonate with you, will ring your bells and will take you in a certain direction. And if you trust that intuition, like sometimes I call it intuition or insight, I think if you trust that, it won't lead you wrong. It'll keep surprising you and how it functions and how it works.
Well, shout out to Brian Swim. He was my teacher as well, and I interviewed him for an upcoming film, and he's an incredible visionary. We're getting into very interesting territory that I didn't necessarily expect, but you talked about karma. You've mentioned the word karma a few times. Mm-hmm. Now we're talking about this kind of mysterious synchronicity, resonance. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you have this sense that the path is laid out for you from a previous.
Well, karma is an interesting phenomenon. And that karma is, from a simple perspective, it's action reaction. In other words, I pick up a baseball and I throw it. Karma says that at some point in time the baseball is going to land with a certain amount of momentum. And where it lands, it may hit somebody in the head, which is going to cause problems. It may break a window, which is going to cause problems. It may land in somebody's glove, at which point he could throw it back to me. But karma is just that action creates reaction. Now, we can observe that on a very simple level. You know, I move my hand, I knock the glass over, and the glass spills and the glass breaks. I mean, it's just physics, simple physics. That's karma. You know, why did the glass break? Well, it's karma. What's the karma? Well, I hit it with my hand. Why did I hit it with my hand? Because I was trying to do something. You know, what caused me to move my hand? As you dive deeper into the question, it gets more and more interesting. In that there's so many factors that are involved in what allows or creates something to happen. As you realize, karma is it's simple, but it's not simple. I mean, it could trace it back to, you know, a shoulder injury I had that made my arm move in a certain way, which came from my playing football, which came from my going to fraternity and MIT, which came from my studying science, which came from the fact that I was incarnated in particular parents at that particular moment in time. All of that's karma.
Maybe you had a shoulder injury 5 lifetimes ago.
That's also possible. But what karma says is that there's more to us than just this narrow slice of space and time that we think about. Mm-hmm. There oftentimes is a lot of other things that are going on that suddenly appear in our life. And where'd that come from? Well, there's a momentum that comes from some level of reality that suddenly comes to fruition. Like the ball's moving along, not a whole lot's happening until the ball lands, and all of a sudden a lot of things happen. And a lot of karma is like that. You know, things are moving along, and all of a sudden, you know, why is that car and that train hit the exact same moment in time, right? Why did the train not go faster or slower? Why did the car not go? I mean, there's so many layers and levels of karma that we can see it, but ultimately it's mysterious. We can never understand it in a rational, logical way, other than to say things happen because of a reason. There's a logic behind it. The logic may not be obvious just because there are too many variables. But you begin to trust it. You begin to recognize that, okay, it's not a random universe. It's not random that hydrogen and oxygen come together and make oxygen, make water. It's not random that water happens to be the one molecule that creates an environment for life to exist. It's the one molecule that can be solid, liquid, and gas under the particular conditions that we live in on this planet. That's karma, but it's not random either. I mean, there's an underlying intelligence to everything. So when the universe starts moving, you know, there's an underlying intelligence to the laws of the universe that keep things moving. And we barely scratch the surface on the laws of the universe. That's the other thing. We tend to think that, we're going to figure it all out soon. This is a great thought at the end of the 1800s, is that we're going to figure, now that we know physics, now that Newton gave us the laws of mechanics, we can figure out everything in the universe. And Einstein came along and said, well, not exactly. We can understand things to a certain level of accuracy, but beyond that, we enter ultimate mystery eventually. You get into quantum physics and you go, well, we're not quite sure. It might happen, but then it might not. So karma is fascinating on that level, but karma is also very simple. Things happen for a reason. Don't take it personally, but try and understand how you fit into the overall puzzle. Oftentimes we have, why do we keep getting into certain problems? Well, we keep repeating the same patterns. Why do we keep repeating the same patterns? Because they're unconscious. We don't even know they're down there. That's what takes us back to our spiritual practice. The spiritual practice to make the unconscious conscious. And then once the unconscious is conscious, then the discriminating intelligence goes, what do I do with this? Right? Do I nurture it? This is an important seed that's growing. Or do I need to heal it? Do I need to take this energy and transform it so it doesn't keep sending me off my rails?
Yeah, one of the things about Vedic astrology that was so interesting to me is this notion that the Vedic readings, the charts, are there to illuminate an individual's karma so that one can essentially shed karma through equanimity, kind of where you're talking about growing up or cleaning up, and then reach some kind of state of enlightenment or nirvana.
So that's an idea, right?
Certainly an idea. Certainly just a word I'm using.
The trick is to transform those ideas into reality. What is it like to live in that place, right? Because the idea says, well, I'm going to shed all my karma, I'm going to live in the infinite. It doesn't work that way. Life keeps unfolding. The universe doesn't just stop. The universe doesn't say, that's enough for me. If there's anything we learned about the world of forms, it wants to keep giving birth to something new. It's ultimately infinitely mysterious. And the thought that, enlightenment is all of a sudden enlightenment. Okay, I got it all. Everything is figured out. I've reached enlightenment. It's like an endpoint. It's like a moment of completion. It's the ego that recognizes that and it wants to get there. It wants to get to the finish line. Oh, enlightenment is the finish line. Good. I'm going to travel this. I'm going to drop all my karma, and then I'm going to live in everlasting happiness in heaven, whatever. Those are interesting concepts and ideas that the ego throws out there that kind of motivate you and help you navigate the world. But ultimately, all you can say is, it's really, really mysterious. And yet there's enough that I can get my hands on that I can make intelligent decisions and keep maneuvering and moving through life. Whatever feeling that I know everything, whatever feeling that actually I know very little. But I trust that this much larger intelligence that's way beyond my ability to understand is actually moving me, moving this organism. It's unfolding within the whole. If I trust that, it's my fallback state. Trust isn't a thing. Trust is sometimes called faith, but it's not belief. If you not say this is the way it is, if you basically say, I have no idea what it is. It's ultimate mystery. And yet there's something about it that if I look around, I see that it's always moving towards greater wholeness, greater complexity, greater love in its deeper movements. And something you can you feel. You kind of get there in your own internal world and you go, wait a minute, this is true. All the great spiritual teachers they basically say the same thing. It's all love. Treat everybody with kindness, treat everyone with love. Do your best to make life a better place. Do your best to contribute to everyone else's well-being, and your own well-being will follow. It doesn't get more simple than that.
But what I'm hearing from you is that there's a sense that a certain kind of creativity wants to move through all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something you've experienced in your life where you're on the right track through certain actions or behaviors or creations moving through you? When do you feel like you've been most in your unique expression or purpose?
If I forget, I go out into nature. I'm a bird watcher, so you watch birds or, plant, look with the trees and like that. And anytime I lose contact with that, nature just pulls me right back. I talk to the lizards in my neighborhood. We have lots of lizards around. I ask them how they do it. They go, they take off. So there's a point. It's a perspective. Wherever you look, you see creativity. The universe keeps giving birth to itself over and again, more and more fascinating. We have a hummingbird that comes to our back. We have these little flowers, and the hummingbird comes every day. Okay. It's another reminder. Creativity is everywhere. And that, again, it's a sense of going out into the world that allows me to come back into myself and say that creativity is not separate from me. That the creativity of the hummingbird is the creativity that flows through me. The hummingbird doesn't have to think about it. The hummingbird just is. The hummingbird just expresses. Hummingbird is. As a human, it's a little more complicated because I can't just go out and flap my wings and I think, okay, what is that? So in the human realm, it's a whole lot more complicated story. We have thought. But occasionally I land in the place, okay, this is again, you're aligned. This is where your creativity is coming. I'm basically an explorer. I mean, that's what, when I used to teach my classes, I basically said, I'm a tour guide to the universe. Right? I have no idea where we're going to go, but my job is to guide you on a tour, and the universe will tell us where we need to go in this moment. And we'll start in the body. We'll start in, somewhere in the body structure. But who knows where that'll take us? It could take us out to the solar system and the galaxies. It could take us down into the cells. It could take us into the mountains and the rivers and the oceans. I mean, it's all of these. They're all part of it's all one. It's all part of us. We just forget. We get caught in, again, a sense of closed off sense, a sense of being separate. And that's what Buddha said in the beginning, is that the number one cause of suffering is alienation, just feeling separate from it. Again, this is the basic teaching of all religions. If you look deeply at it, it's just in Christianity, the Christian world is to be one with God. Right? Buddhism is to recognize your Buddha nature. And Vedanta is, again, to recognize that Brahman is everything. Tatvamasi, you are wholeness. You are the infinite. You are ultimate mystery. It's not separate from you. But in our embryological journey, right, at the beginning of conception, the egg and the sperm come together, and all of a sudden, wow, this is a living entity that's trying to navigate in the world, and it's alone. And it starts to get down the fallopian terms, and it goes, I can't survive until I bond with something. Right? So it joins the lines with the uterine lining, and if that works, the soul says, okay, I'm going to handle this body. It starts to grow and develop until it reaches a point where it can't continue unless it separates. Right? It has to detach itself and be pushed into the world. So it has to go from being alone to connected and attached to separate, and then it born and it's separated, and it can't survive unless it again attaches. It attaches to its primary caregiver, the mother or whatever. And its whole emotional development depends on its ability to attach to. There's a whole phenomenon called attachment theory, which is basically emotions, how you learn to navigate your emotional self-regulation. And the quality of your parental caregiving, whoever it is, doesn't have to be your mother or father, just some adult, someone with a mature nervous system, bonds with you and helps you navigate your own emotional dysregulation. This is, again, the same thing as trauma. If you have somebody who can help you navigate your emotional dysregulated states, then you can go to learn to regulate your own states. And then you become an independent entity. You're able to go off to school on your own. You're able to go off into the world on your own. But you realize that it's kind of lonely. I want to bond with somebody. I want to bond with my tribe. I want to bond with a group. I want to bond with another individual. And I want to develop an emotional relationship. So all of a sudden, you're connected again. So we have this back and forth between being attached and bonded and then being a separate individual. And maturity is being able to hold both of those possibilities simultaneously, to be a unique individual who doesn't need to be held by somebody, at the same time to be enough connected to the world that you feel connected to everybody simultaneously. Yeah, that's maturing. It's that spiral of going through that separate, attached, individual attached. The problem is we get caught in the sense of being separate, and the ego feels it's separate from everything at all times, which is a torturous state. And then it starts behaving in all kinds of irrational ways in order to heal that injury, that wound, that pain that creates. We have a president who was obviously incredibly traumatized as a youth. I mean, the emotional trauma that he must live with is just mind-boggling. The unfortunate dilemma is that he's turned around and inflicted it on everybody else because he hasn't learned to heal it himself. He hasn't learned to deal with it himself. So he obviously has enough people with a shared shadow to keep feeding him, right? shadow is another word for that unconscious, unresolved issues. I think the shadow is a Jungian term for that part of us which we haven't yet to acknowledge, we have yet to recognize, which is pathological. And you see this in the individual. You also see this in spiritual communities. One of the challenges of spiritual communities is that they often have a collective shadow, and that the guru, the leader, the spiritual head, just like the parent figure in the sangha, the community is like the children. And if there's not a mature relationship between the two, right? You have a needy parent and needy children, then you have some very unhealthy situations. And there's all kinds of spiritual community trauma that you can look across over the last 50 years, especially the confusion between East and West, where Eastern teachers who don't have the same, background as the Western teachers come over, and the Western students are, they're looking for mommy and daddy, and sex, power, and money, the big three, suddenly take over, and all of a sudden it's not a relationship of wholeness. There's a relationship of neediness. And
do you see the possibility of a community, whether it's a spiritual community or any kind of community that's interested in evolution of some kind, of developing without these kind of shadow issues or power dynamics? I mean,
I don't think we're ever going to get rid of the shadow issues. I think the only problem is if we deny they exist. So I think, I think there's no reason why we can't have. It's like a mature family. You can have your emotional issues and thrash them out, and then move on. I'll throw out the Boston Celtics as in the present moment example of a collective bunch of guys who had some bad experiences and had a huge fallout, and yelling and screaming, but that trauma was just something that had to come out, and they resolved it. They worked it together. They came out as adult human beings and actually transformed themselves to a whole other level. And I think a spiritual community can do the same thing. What it needs is the ability and the strength to say, okay, there's an issue that needs to be held. There's an issue that needs to be discussed. And there's no power hierarchy. Right? That's when it becomes an issue. It's a power hierarchy. When I was with Swami Dayananda, my Vedanta teacher, he was amazing is that, he basically said, you guys all know this. This is all, you got it. Don't worry about it. There was no power. I know and you don't, right? I have the truth and you don't. I have the answer and you don't. You have to follow me. You have to tell me. If you don't remember that, if you don't recognize it, believe it, well, the way it's something to talk about. But there's no power. There's no hierarchy. He says, we're all this. We're all this together. If something comes up, let's talk about it. And if there's an issue, let's talk about it as a community.
There's leadership without power.
Huh?
Well, there can be leadership without a power hierarchy.
Exactly. Yeah. One can recognize this person knows more than we do about this, so that we respect that they know more, but they don't know everything. They're not absolute rulers over my own internal psyche. I mean, they may have insight in certain directions. I have insight in other directions. This person has insight in other directions, and then again, we learn to navigate. One, we trust our own intuition. And then we trust that the collective can also evolve its own intuition. So I think what we're moving towards is a collective intelligence, a collective, emerging collective intelligence, which is not a power hierarchy, but it does involve a spiral of learning and developing. It's a growth hierarchy, in that we recognize that this person has grown further in this because they've had a lot more experience. So there's a certain amount of wisdom they have. That doesn't mean I give my life to them and bow at their feet and say, okay, you tell me how to live my life. Follow them around, dress like them.
You live in Ojai, the home of Krishnamurti, and he was so clear saying, don't follow me. Truth is a pathless land. I'm not your guru, but still many people revered him like a guru. Absolutely. Followed him.
Yeah.
So there's some complicated issue. Human nature.
Yeah, that's human nature. And that, again, human nature is, there's nothing wrong with that as long as the role of the teacher is to encourage them to grow up. To encourage them to wake up, to grow up, and to clean up their act. I mean, that's a wise leader. Recognize that all three of these things need to be done. And a wise leader knows that they need to continue to wake up, grow up, and clean up as well. It's not like they've above it. It's like I've already done all this stuff, That's part of the maturity. That's part of the growing up. If we come back to spiritual awakening, I think it's far more important to be emotionally awake and growing up than it is to be spiritually awake. Because you can be spiritually awake and an emotionally dysfunctional person, and that's a scary thing. Because you have access to this incredible power, and yet you don't know how to handle it. When you come into the world of form, you don't know how to handle it. This is where gurus get into trouble. All of a sudden students are bowing at their feet and telling how wonderful they are, and they start to go, well, maybe I am wonderful. Maybe I do deserve to have 10 Rolls Royces or whatever.
Or 97.
Or 90, whatever the number is.
Mm-hmm.
So the emotional maturity almost should come first before we try and get into this spiritual awake thing. Although if you wake up, it's good. I mean, not to encourage people not to wake up, but I think the emotional maturity is absolutely foundational.
What's the correlation? I mean, I guess it seems like it's not the case, but I would think it might be the case that an awakening experience would lead to some kind of a emotional maturity through the.
Not necessarily.
Yeah, but why is that?
Why is that? Because they're totally separate. Well, to say they're separate is not quite accurate, because nothing is separate. Everything is integrated. But you have to emotionally go through the emotional development, and you can't skip levels. You can't skip grades. One can say that an infant is totally spiritually awake, but they're not conscious. There's no consciousness of it. They're not aware of that. So gradually they get immersed in their own egoic structures. But at any moment in time, they can have a revelation. God can speak to them, whatever, however they language it. And anytime you have a spiritual experience or revelation, you will always express it and embody it at the developmental level that you are. So if you're egocentric, God's speaking to me. That makes me a very important person. So I'm going to elevate myself because God has chosen me. Right? Or ethnocentric, God has chosen us. We are the chosen ones. So we can go out there and assault the world no matter what. And then at some point in time, the awakening gets lost. We're not even in the awakening anymore. We just had that experience that inflated the ego, and then you forget all about it. You're not in the awakened state anymore. You're just in this highly charged ego. And if God comes back and speaks to you, then he just reinforces it.
Can you talk about it from the embodied perspective? So much of your work has been investigating the inner world from an embodiment perspective, whether it's through Iyengar, through Bonnie's work, Emily.
Like Conrad's work and Continuum. What I'm finding is that we talk about the unconscious. I think the largest component to our individual and collective unconscious is the possible intelligence of the body, intelligence of the cells, the intelligence of the organs, the intelligence of the bones, the intelligence of the blood. Those are modes of intelligence. They're also places where we store they're not only unconscious, but we also store a lot of trauma in the body. So when you actually awaken the body, you're accessing the trauma, you're accessing an underlying intelligence that can heal the trauma. And it takes you out of your thinking brain, your abstract place where beliefs and ideas so easily take you out of the present moment. Whereas the body is always in the present moment. Our senses are always in the present moment. What do we hear, what we see, what we feel is always in the present moment. Our intellect can jump out of the present moment and quickly go into the future or past and get stuck there. So by coming back into the body, you're at least grounding yourself in the present moment. This is what I feel now. This is what sensations are happening now. And they may trigger, oh my God, what's going to happen? Fear of death is very much part of being in the body. So you get diagnosed with cancer, all of a sudden your reality goes, oh shit, what am I going to do with this, right? Then you start projecting what's going to happen next year, what's going to happen in 5, what's going to happen. And you get into this crazy projection. So you have to come back and say, wait a minute, those are all thoughts. This is what's happening now. This is the state of the body now, right? I'm still alive, nothing's happened yet. If I make intelligent decisions today, it may have an effect on what happens tomorrow. If I make intelligent decisions in the next few months, it may have an effect on what's going on. again, your discriminative intelligence kicks in and says, okay, in this moment, this is what's happening. Let's make some decisions. There's karma here. There's a cancer is growing. A very aggressive cancer is growing. That's your karma. Whatever it is, that's what it is. So what do you do about it? What decisions do you make? So the body constantly offers you options to wake up, develop your discriminative intelligence, and then try and heal.
One of the things that I love from Brian Swim is this notion that our bodies are however many hundreds of millions, you could say 13.8 billion, but hundreds of millions of years of intelligence leading up to this moment, whereas our minds are relatively new phenomena.
Yeah.
Just the amount of wisdom in our bodies. And that's when I do a workshop with you or Bonnie or something, just the insights and dreams and revelations that might come from that are so profound. And they're just from embodiment that has nothing to do ostensibly with seeking insight.
Yeah, I think you can go back into all the mythologies. I'm convinced it comes from the body. It's the body's trying to communicate to us, and then we express it in mythology. We express it in a very right brain story and color. It's only in the last few hundred years that the left brain has really taken over. And the dilemma with the left brain is that it's detached from the body. The left brain does not get direct information from the body. The information in the body comes up to the right brain, then crosses over the corpus callosum to get to the left brain. So if you're in your abstract thought, you're not in touch with your body at all. So I used to run into this all the time in my classes. I say, how's your leg feel? Or I said, can you feel your leg? Can you feel your hamstring? Whatever it is. I think so. I go, no. There's nothing to do with thought. Either you feel it or you don't.
Yeah.
But if you're in thought, you're trying to think about it. And this was, the very first experience I had with Ingar. Again, he wanted to teach me how to practice. He literally came up in front of me. I was doing triangle pose. And he comes up and he puts his foot right in front of my foot, the triangle pose. And he says, let's look at our feet. He looks at my foot and says, I look at my foot and I says, how come this blood pressure, there's blood here, there's color here, and there's white over here? How come this toe is turning and this turns now? How come this is going up? And I'm trying to figure out what he's asking me. I'm trying to think about it. He's telling me, feel. Bring your awareness and put your attention right at the roots of your body and feel what the body is telling you. And I'm going, I don't know. One of the reasons I didn't know, because there wasn't information coming to my body, from my body to my brain, because I hadn't established those neural connections yet. So in practice, I literally had to create a neural connection where I could actually listen to my foot. My foot could communicate to me. And I say, oh, that's my foot. It's talking to me, right? Usually wouldn't feel it unless it hurt. And then as soon as it stops hurting, you don't pay attention to it anymore. But to understand the nuances of what your body is telling you, you have to spend time listening to the body. You have to spend time letting the information come to you. And then once the information comes to you, it tells you what you need to do, right? You're torquing your knee, you're hyperextending your knee, you're collapsing the outside of the ankle. All that is information is pouring into you from the body itself. But if I try and think about it, well, the teacher said I'm supposed to do this, and it looks like in the book I'm supposed to do that, you're totally missing the point. The point is, let your body tell you. But the body won't tell you until you spend the hours and hours and hours and hours and hours listening to the body, so you actually understand the language of the body. And the language of the body in the beginning, I tell beginners, is easy. It feels good. It doesn't feel good. I can't tell. Right. It feels good. You have information. If it doesn't feel good. You have information. If you can't tell, spend more time. Or go to the place where your body is speaking to you directly. This hurts. This actually feels good. Good. That's telling you something. Stay with the feeling. What's happening in the body that's saying this feels good? What are you actually doing that the body says this feels good? The energy is flowing more freely. There's more intelligence there. There's more presence there. There's more tension there. There's more balance and harmony there. When you start to feel the balance and harmony, the body goes, yes, this is good. So on some levels, practice about, again, the descriptive intelligence is in Sanskrit terms is what's called the gunas, the three qualities of manifest, three qualities of form. And I like to call it the Goldilocks principle to make it simple. It's too much, not enough, just right. So you're overworking the muscle, it's just working too hard, not much happening, it's pretty dull. Oh, that's just the right amount of energy. You're just in perfect balance. All of a sudden it starts to hum, right? Energy is moving like a guitar string. It's too tight, bing, it'll break. Too loose, doesn't make any sound. Strung just the right amount, bingo. You get a note that's in tune. So the body's the same way. Too tight, too loose, just right. Meditation, hold the mind too tightly, you're neurotic. The mind's too loose, it wanders all over the place. Hold the mind in just the right space that goes, oh, wait a minute. I never felt this quiet before. And it's not sleepy. How do I do that? Well, you have to learn. You have to teach yourself. Too much? Not enough? That's right. And that goes back to that emotional self-regulation we talked about, either when working with trauma or as an infant that you're learning from your parents. I remember my son, when he was early on, had energy regulation. This is all boys do, especially. And there was something about your engine. They had this model of, this is your engine. You have to regulate your engine. You don't want to rev it too high, and you don't want to shut it down. You want to have it rev, turning it just much. I guess they're trying to appeal to boys and cars and things like that. But the metaphor is universal. You can start to feel, this feels fluid, this feels graceful, this feels alive. This is like tight and rigid, and this is like dull. This is like there's nobody home. It's like something's missing here. So how do I feel and regulate? And then to spend your practice, whether it's martial arts, you feel your dantian connects you to the earth, that creates ground, which allows the body to be stable. And dance, the same thing. You learn how gravity moves through you. Your center of gravity allows you to move with more freedom. You find alignment through your core. All of a sudden, when you're aligned, the energy flows more easily. When you're out of alignment, things are stuck and don't quite feel right. So you start to learn what alignment is. Just like a musician learns alignment by learning to tune their guitars. Now they don't have to do that anymore. They have electronic tuners. They don't have to use their ears anymore. They can actually lights up when it's in tune, which I guess is, I would use that if I were a guitar player, but somebody who has a good ear, they didn't have those. You got to hear it. It's in tune, it's not in tune. You feel it. I'm in tune, I'm out of tune. When I'm out of tune, my discriminative intelligence kicks in and says, okay, now what do I do? What's happening here? And the answer is, I don't know. At which point, okay, I need to listen. And I think we get right back to where we are in our culture. We don't listen enough as a culture. That's a yin thing. We have a culture that wants to do. Tell me what to do. Don't ask me to listen. Don't ask me to pay attention and notice the nuances. Just tell me what I need to do. Tell me what my legs should do. Tell me how I should put my body up. Tell me what I should do as a culture and society. Give me the rules. Tell me what to do. Whereas we need to listen. This is the Black Lives Matter movement. The whole thing is nobody has listened to the Black community in the whole history. The white people certainly haven't listened to it. They finally reached the point where they have enough power and voice to say, you need to listen. And we go, holy shit, how do we miss this? How do we as a collective not see this? Well, we're still stuck at ethnocentric. Our collective energy, the center of gravity of our culture was way back in tribal ethnocentric. Only now we're trying to push through that boundary of global centric by listening, hearing the stories. Hearing the stories of Black men, especially, but Black women also, what they've had to go through, what they still continue to go through. It's amazing. We have a president who's absolutely terrified at actually racial intelligence. He's actually, he gave a speech the other day on part of the National Archives, how we have to go back to America and we have to love America. We have to love America's heroes and all of this other stuff. It's all troublemakers. People are just stirring up trouble. Why can't we go back to just being proud of our heroes and our ancestors, how wonderful they were? Let's just ignore the shadow completely and live in fantasy land. It's an easy place to do. As a culture, it's very easy to live in fantasy land. White people live in white supremacy fantasy without even knowing it.
There's fantasies within the fantasy, within the illusion.
Oh, absolutely. The book *Sapiens* was a fascinating diving into the way mythology is needed to organize humans. You made the point that to go from tribal to the more larger communities of agricultural, you cannot communicate with larger groups of more than 20 or 30, maybe 100 people, without starting out stories that unite people in their ability to organize themselves toward a common goal. So 10,000 years ago, 8,000 years ago, we started developing these mythologies, and we still are entranced by our mythology. America has a mythology about itself. which is totally false. It's totally delusional, but it's very seductive. Everybody wants to live in a fantasy world, because to live in the real world is painful. To acknowledge the damage, to acknowledge the trauma, to acknowledge the pain and suffering we've created is too painful. People don't want to go there. So I just want to live in my fantasy world. Shut up and dribble.
It would seem as if a lot of the conflict on a societal level is from this contradiction or tension between this kind of what you're calling a superorganism or global brain, or this kind of entity that's emerging on the whole globe, and these more fragmented or fractured ethnocentric beliefs. So things are coexisting, but they're not aligned.
No, and that's part of the trauma, is that something new is emerging, and that it's, there's a lot of resistance to its emergence, because you have to listen and you have to go through grief. I think grief is probably one of the most unexplored and essential emotions we have. I don't think people know how to grieve. I think that's, when you talk about stored trauma, the sexual trauma and physical trauma and abuse, that's a whole other realm. But just grief is a level of repressed energy that is healing just by opening it up. But people don't want to go there. I've spent the last 6 months just crying all the time. I mean, every once in a while another wave comes up, related to all kinds of different levels, but mostly to, just what humans do to each other, how other humans treat each other. I mean, it's just this amazing amount of grief when we look at that. But that's where the healing is actually recognize it. And with the grief coming out of us, we actually move and we liberate energy to go further. But without going into that grief, we can't heal, because that energy is not there to help us grow. We haven't had a collective grieving around this whole process of racism and slavery and whatever. And we're trying to have a collective grieving, awakening, recognition, and then again, the discriminant intelligence goes, again, what do we do with it? All right, here it is. We start to feel it. We start to recognize it. We start to notice it. That's the key point. And then we say, okay, now, what decisions do we make? How do we deal with this? How do we move forward? How do we train the police better? How do we educate our children from the beginning about the history? How do we educate each other? How do we open up the lines of communication so we can actually just speak to each other even if we disagree? Really speak from the heart. Someone else speaks from the heart. It's okay, that's all that counts. It's not about right or wrong. It's about the ability to speak from the heart and to feel. So there are many levels of evolution that talk about the various chakras, from the first, second, and third chakra. First chakra is survival, second chakra is survival of species, sex, and third chakra is power, the last refuge of the ego. And then the fourth chakra is the heart chakra. So one could recognize the energy is slowly starting to move up. Our collective energy is stirring around and it's entangled in the survival, sex, and power. And in order to move up to the heart level, some of this energy has to be freed up. And then all of a sudden, there's a little more energy of the heart to open up. As the heart opens up, it frees up more energy that we go back and, again, clean up some of the issues, and then go to the fifth chakra, the sixth chakra, the seventh chakra. We actually start to collect to our celestial realms. We give voice to our heart. Our third eye gives us insight, cosmological insight. But that movement from below the diaphragm to above the diaphragm is a big boundary. I mean, one of the things you learn in your body is that the diaphragm is a huge barrier between the lower body and the upper body. It's only got 3 little openings in it.
That's where all the knots are.
Yeah. That's what we hold. That's what we freeze. The freeze response in trauma. It's the diaphragm that freezes, which is the biological imperative that goes way back to our mammalian ancestors. One of the survival mechanisms, you fight, you flee, or you freeze. If you can't fight because you're not fast enough, strong enough, and you can't flee because you're not fast enough, you freeze. And that's what we do in trauma. We freeze. And that freezing is the diaphragm. The diaphragm starts to move, and the energy below it starts to move. And then that starts to move, and then all of a sudden you start to integrate that with your heart and your breathing. That's why the breath is so powerful. The breath is not only the diaphragm. The breath starts to open the lung space. And then you link that back to the lower body, so the upper body and the lower body start to work together. And all of a sudden you have an organismic intelligence that the brain can then just rest on So all of this intelligence then is being fed by all this intelligence. Instead of this being separate from everything else, you put your necktie on, and then you live in your head. You have no idea what's going on down here, so you make stuff up. You live in a fantasy world, right? And you're ignoring all of the trauma that your body is trying to express because you say, I don't want to go there. I can't deal with it. So your body practice is it's not easy, but it's all there is. We are embodied beings. We're not talking heads.
I had a professor at Williams College, a religion professor actually, and someone would raise their hand and they would say, I feel like so and so and so, and he would say, no, I don't want to hear what you feel. I want to hear what you think. And so he would make this decisive separation between, and maybe, yeah, it was really, really interesting.
That's academia.
That is academia. Yes.
That is academia.
That's so fragmented.
Yeah. Well, Houston Smith, who was my teacher, he was at MIT for a while and he eventually left. Syracuse gave him a chair. Syracuse thought really elevated, but at MIT he felt he was a lost soul. He, in one of his books, he talked about this fascinating double entendre. He stumbled into. He was having lunch at the faculty club with one of the more scientific bents, and the scientist looks at Houston and says, "I finally figured it out. Now I get it." He's talking about science versus philosophy. He says, "We count and you don't." And Houston goes, yeah, that's about right.
Yeah.
Of course, the little definition is in science, you can measure. And science says, well, if you can't measure it, we don't want to deal with it, right? It's just esoteric. Right? So if you measure it, it counts, it's valuable, it's worthwhile. You can think it through and analyze it as something valuable. If you can't do any of that, it's not worthwhile. It doesn't count. But philosophy can be very abstract as well. Philosophy can become a head thing. Right? You can have all these ideas and beliefs and concepts that are still dissociated from the body. To me, a philosophy has no meaning unless it's really coming from the visceral component, unless your guts and your heart are very much entwined in what it is you're feeling. And then you can express, wow, this is what is evoked by these feelings. This is what is evoked by this deep knowing. Your guts are your kind of connection to the animal world. The guts are where you actually feel before you even think about anything. It's your primal connection. It's your visceral, safe, not safe. I feel connected. Oh, I feel something isn't right. And then you get to the heart, and all of a sudden you have a much broader perspective on things. It's not just safe and unsafe, but literally how you can relate from a place of love and wisdom, and how insecurity and fear can be overcome by an open heart. And that comes back to practice. When you come back to your spiritual, any practice, it's a movement practice, any practice that engages the organism. My current belief right now, my idea, my model of reality is that an embodied spiritual practice should facilitate effortless movement. Whatever it is you do, it should give the body a sense that it can move as effortlessly as possible. And it should facilitate the ability to rest in stillness. So your body can just be present. And sitting is the most natural state for that. Sitting is what I call the neutral position. Standing is more yang, lying down is more yin. And sitting is kind of the halfway between the heaven and earth. You're kind of linking heaven and earth in a very effortless way. So this is classic sitting practices, the place of stillness. In fact, asana, the original word asana, basically meant first was the seat you sat on, and then it was just any posture for meditation. And only later on did it become this vast elaborate display of other expressions of embodiment that became the modern world of asana. But anything that gets you out of your head and into your immediate connection, because that takes you out of the head tends to take you out of the present moment. Thoughts basically tend to navigate between past and future, whereas the body is always present. Even the meditation world, they're all talking about coming into the body, which is, I think, is fascinating. It took a while to get there, but they finally realized that embodiment, meditation is an embodied practice. It's a somatic practice. Movement is a meditation practice. So you can see it, they're two related. Whatever that movement may be, martial arts or simple qigong or tai chi or dance, but even athletic maneuvers, playing tennis, playing basketball, playing football. In many ways, you're absorbed in a collective energy field. So you're learning to participate in a larger and larger energetic flow. The trick in those athletic endeavors is that they don't necessarily lend you to a self-inquiry. This is, okay, now I have this fluid intelligence. Can I take it inward and start to look at myself and examine my behavior and my emotional maturity and grow from there? Right? I can create a tremendous amount of skill on the physical plane, but it doesn't help me necessarily grow emotionally unless I choose to make that.
There wasn't much self-inquiry as a college football player trying to hit people as hard as I possibly could.
No, not at all. But it was fun.
It was fun.
It was visceral. It was something very powerful about it, right? It was reflecting on a very urge of the body to express itself, to move. And I think we can honor that. We can honor the body's wanting to continually find ways in which it can express itself. So I love to watch the Olympics. 90% of the time I have no idea what any of these things are, but every 4 years or whatever, every 2 years now, because they alternate, I get to see people doing weird stuff on skateboards and snowboards, and just it's amazing how more and more advanced movements people are doing in embodiment. The young people are pushing the edges of what you can do in the embodied state. Athletes are getting better every year. They're getting stronger, faster, bigger. We just need to take that and use that as a vehicle for finding stillness and also finding that emotional spiral of growth and the healing of the trauma. Again, the big three, wake up, wake up, grow, clean up.
Well, can you say something about shavasana and how it relates to yoga practice?
Shavasana is a place where you first begin to relax. One of the things that working with Iyengar was fascinating is that you go through this incredibly rigorous physical practice. You were hot and you're sweating because it's India, and he's yelling and screaming, and you're just holding poses and doing incredible. 2 or 3 hours later, you're just wiped out. You're just nothing left. You're lying as a puddle. You lie down, all of a sudden it's very quiet. It's very relaxing because you've got nothing left. You literally, there's no more energy to expend. So it opened up that doorway into going into, and then they taught you through some pretty profound guided meditations. I mean, Shavasana requires this good guided meditation to really get you into those deeper spaces. So Shavasana is an opportunity to let the body completely relax and let the mind gradually go inwards, which is not wandering. It's okay, what am I going to do after class? Okay, what am I have to do? I got a long list of things I got to do. It's not letting the mind go there. It's letting the mind actually go deeper and deeper inwards into the stillness, into the silence. That's the theory. You carry a lot of tension in our spine. People who sit and stand, people who are not used to moving, their whole spinal column is often carrying a huge amount of tension. So in Shavasana, in a supported Shavasana where you make yourself as comfortable as possible, all that tension in the spine can start to relax. So your breath hopefully gets a little bit softer, and you start to go, wait a minute, I don't have to hold on to this much tension. I don't have to carry myself this way. But for the average person, we normalize out very quickly. In other words, if I'm this level of tense every day, after a while, I don't notice that I'm that tense. This becomes normal to me. Until I have experience of deep relaxation, I go, wait a minute, this is radically different than what I'm used to. Why am I not like this, and why am I like that? Then your discriminative intelligence hopefully kicks in and goes, okay, what do I need to do? How can I sustain this sense of relaxation even as I'm up and moving around? And that begins, again, there's no necessarily an answer to that. I mean, part of the meditation practice and any spiritual practice, you have to be curious and able to rest in not knowing. It's not like, oh, give me the answers and I can solve the problem. Right? You have to be able to face the unknown and face mystery and face not knowing, and yet still say, okay, I'm here now, so I know it's possible. Right? So how do I get back here? And that's why I don't know yet. Okay, well, let's find somebody who can guide me. Let's find somebody who can teach me, and then I have to do it on my own. This is that interplay between the teacher and the student. We always need teachers. Always need teachers to keep us in line, to keep us pointing, to open us up to new territories, to point out things we don't necessarily see on our own. So the role of a good teacher is to, again, just help you keep waking up. Not become dependent on them for the truth, but to help you wake up. To say, okay, try this. To encourage you. To say, you can do this. You got this. You're already perfect and whole. You already got what you need to know. Now, let's develop what you have.
It's interesting to think of you continuing to study with teachers because you abound with so much wisdom and embodied knowledge, and yet you do still hold a number of individuals as your teachers in different regards.
Well, it's one of the things I recognize, we're all teaching the same thing. From a certain point of view, from a spiritual perspective, everybody's teaching wake up, grow up, clean up. Once you reach a certain level of spiritual teaching, we're all teaching the same thing. But every teacher comes at it from a slightly different perspective. They're embodying it in a different way. They're expressing it in a different way. And then the people that I resonate most with are the ones who are close enough that I can recognize what it is they're saying, but at the same time, they're offering me new insights that, oh, I hadn't looked at it that way before, or I hadn't considered that before, or a teacher will have a certain set of experience with students that I haven't had before. So, oh boy, if I have students, that'll be helpful to know that because they've had experience with that. So it's part of the collective. I mean, within a collective consciousness, we're all learning. We're all learning together. It's like the liver discovered the kidneys. And he goes, kidneys, I'm pretty cool. I know what kidneys are. What goes on? I got the liver under control. But the liver and the kidneys start to speak together. Wait a minute, I can teach you something about the organism from a liver point of view that from the kidney point of view you don't have. Right? Both plugged into the organism. So, okay, the liver teaches the kidney and the kidney teaches the liver. But some of the larger expressions of things. And some teachers have tapped into deeper and deeper dimensions of reality than I have. I mean, I'm still a novice in all this.
I wouldn't say that.
We're all novices on one level. It's all relative.
Mm-hmm.
It's always relative. There's always somebody who knows more than you and always somebody who knows less than you. It's like in sports, there's always somebody who's faster than you, there's always somebody who's slower than you. So you don't have to judge yourself or label yourself by trying to slot yourself into good or bad. Just,
I wonder.
There's always teachers who know more, and there's always teachers who are more tuned in, and you just say, wow, how can this be helpful? Not every teacher can be helpful because they may not be, again, there's a certain amount of resonance. There's only so much information I can absorb. Right? The organism is limited in what it can absorb. So I have to filter. It says, this teacher speaks a language that makes sense to me. This teacher, I understand what they're saying, but it's not offering me anything new. There's no nuances there. Because we all say, wake up, grow up, clean up. So that's not new. But the nuances of that, nuances of trauma, the nuances of growing up, what are some of the aspects of that? The nuances of the waking up process. It's a balance between, being able to stay within my own practice. Like my connection to Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen, is that through embryology, I'm studying Taoist practice, and Taoism is connected to embryology, and Bonnie is the one who's inspired me about embryology, and she is the queen of embryology. She is the mistress of embryology. So her language and my language are one of the same. She just has insights because of her years and years of experience in working with herself and working with her clients and working with her students, that there's always another level that comes up. More often than not with Bonnie, sometimes, oh man, we covered this 20 years ago and I forgot all about that. I did it, but now it's coming back. Now it's like a spiral. I get reminded, I forgot about that. I can go back and recapture some of that. I started to work with it and I didn't fully develop it. So let me go back and see if I can develop a little bit further. Whereas a teacher in a different tradition, I have no experience or background in the tradition. So I don't quite necessarily have a foundation from which I can jump into that and move with it.
If someone hasn't, maybe they've read some books like The Power of Now or heard of spirituality, they're interested in it, but where would you point people to start in terms of a practice or in terms of the path towards waking?
Breathing. Breathing is the easiest thing. Just take 2 minutes, take 1 minute and stop, slow down, and just let things gradually get quieter and quieter and quieter. So you begin to watch, you begin to observe what's happening. You become what's called the witness or the seer to what's arising. So you're no longer unconsciously engaged in the world. You're stepping back from it and just starting to notice what's going on around you. And then start to notice what's going on inside of you. And that's where the process is. Meditation practice, you notice the mind just goes on nonstop. Sometimes it's a revelation to actually say, I can watch my mind moving nonstop instead of being the nonstop mind. So you create a degree of separation from that. You're observing it as opposed to being it. So that stepping back is almost the first step, and say, okay, wow, my mind is going nonstop. What do I do about it? And the answer is nothing. Just be the observer. Just let it be. But the mind wants to figure out. Give me some ideas. Give me some tricks. Give me some ways in which I can make my mind stop. And for beginners in meditation, they can spend years and years trying to make their mind stop. Whereas a more experienced student goes, mind moves. Yeah, of course it moves. What else would you expect it to do? But you stop feeding it. You stop being reactive. So I think one of the first stages of meditation is we're learning not to be reactive, which goes right back to being a child. One of the things you teach children is that, I know you want to hit Tommy over the head with that truck, but that's not a good idea. You just pause, right? I know you want to eat that whole bag of cookies, but probably not a good idea. Control your impulses. That goes on forever. That ability to have an urge to react and the ability to step back and say, I don't need to do that. So I think as a spiritual practice, that's probably the most important thing anybody can learn, is to step back and just not be as reactive as they are to things, to the simple things, to the trivial things. The big things, the reaction happens, and then you go, oops, I overreacted. I yelled at, I didn't mean to yell at you, I'm sorry, I just get carried away. I didn't mean to do that, I just wasn't thinking. But anything that gives you the ability to step back, and that's being quiet, letting the breath be, and just creating that place of just watching, just noticing your mind, noticing the body in meditation. You can just do a body scan, what are you feeling in your body? So you start to get to know it. It's like a friend you haven't met in a long time. Sit down, have a conversation. Tell me what's going on with you. What's your story? Let me listen to you. You're doing that with yourself. Let me listen to you. Let me find out what's going on in my head. Let me find out what's going on in my body. Then you learn to do it with other people. Then all of a sudden you learn to listen to other people. You don't go in and project yourself onto them. Let me learn something from them. And then something comes up that you want to react to. You go, Very easy to be reactive in the world. It's a real struggle to open my news feed and not just start screaming. Visceral. It's just a visceral anger, grief, frustration. Triggered again and again. The autonomic nervous system keeps being triggered. Dangerous. You'll be afraid of this. And there's a large component of the media world that wants to keep triggering the fear response. This is the downside of media. Is that media feeds on trauma. Media feeds on fear. Media wants to take you down that low road of anger and reactivity and fear, because that gets a very large emotional response. The good news isn't on the front page. The good news is buried in page 7 in the bottom paragraph somewhere. So we have to find that ourselves. We have to find a way to nurture that with those. Where's the story of my heart opening? Where can I read about the heart in the newspaper, in the news? Why? There are stories out there. I mean, anytime there's like the COVID has brought a lot of. You get the two different reactions in COVID, right? You get the people who are stepping outside themselves and moving into selfless service. Then you get the self-centered people who are just acting as as outrageous as possible. But a crisis offers the opportunity to not be reactive, but to actually move from your heart. The trick is to not not be stimulated by crisis all the time. It's just to find a way in your normal, simple day-to-day life that you can be in that same place. And be very kind and forgiving to yourself. That's the other thing. It's very easy to become judgmental when you start to watch yourself, when you realize how much trauma there is, how much fear, how much insecurity, how much patterning and habits that are in there that are not necessarily helpful or productive. And then you start judging because the ego says, oh my God, this is terrible, this is horrible. Instead of saying, no, it's just the way it is. There's a history behind this. There's a karmic momentum behind this. So you just have to accept that this is it. I think the greatest source of suffering is arguing with what is. That doesn't mean you don't respond to what is with discriminating awareness and intelligence, but to argue with what is a waste of time and energy. And fighting with what is even worse. So your own unconscious issues come up. You can't argue them. You have to accept them. Not give in to them, not become unconscious and let them take over, nor get into this incredible self-judgment. Because that's another huge pitfall that everybody falls into when they start doing self-awareness, self-inquiry, meditation practice. You start realizing, oh my God, I'm a mess. There's nothing personal. We're all in the same boat. We're all going through the same trauma. We're all going through the same unfolding. We're all humans trying to learn. We're not living in a fantasy world of angelic perfection that we're trying to achieve. We're living in a world of, can I be present to what is? Can I accept fully what is, and then accept that part of what fully is an internal intelligence that can awaken and help me navigate this. There's an internal awareness, there's a collective awareness. It's emerging on both sides. It's emerging from inside of me, and I look outside, and it's also emerging out there as well. So I can actually look outside and get reassurance and nurturing, as well as looking inside and get reassurance and nurturing. And that's just dependent on myself. I can actually go out and say, wait a minute, I'm being supported by a much larger field. So I can bond and I can be an individual. I can be in a bonded relationship and I can be an individuated, unique entity. And I can hold both of those paradoxical states effortlessly. Spirituality is all about paradox. I'm perfect, I'm whole, I'm complete. And there's a whole lot of learning and growing and pain and suffering to go through. And I have to make sure both of those are in balance. If they go out of balance, then I stop growing. If I lose touch with that innate divine perfection, then I get lost, I just get overwhelmed. If I lose touch with all the stuff that needs to grow, I just become arrogant.
It's that sweet spot, like the musical instrument.
That's a very interesting sweet spot. It's present moment. It is the present moment, it is the center of the fulcrum, around which things pivot, the center of the wheel, around which everything turns. Dan Siegel uses that wheel as a metaphor for his meditation. You've seen the hub of awareness meditation?
I have, yeah.
Where the hub, the center, is pure awareness, just the infinite true nature. And then the spokes are attention going to the various sensory portals through which we interact with the world. The 5 outer senses and then 3 inner senses, 3 or 4 inner senses, how you look at it. And awareness can look through any of the 5 portals outwards, and we're going to look through any of the internal portals, which are proprioception, what's going on inside the body, kinesthesia, how my body is self-organizing, and the relational neurons, the part of the brain that's associated with relationship and connection. It's a whole other part of it. So all of those are information systems that are bringing information to the system, and our job is to integrate all that information, to just keep coming in and keep making it part of a larger and larger complex and yet simple whole. Complexity is the amount of differentiated pieces that come. The simplicity is that they're all operating as a whole. They're operating as a single entity. And that's that dance again of the hub of the wheel and the center of the wheel.
And the question of who am I?
You're the wheel. You are the source of the wheel. You're what unfolds off the wheel. You're the observer of the wheel. And it goes on and on and on.
I think we've covered quite
A lot.
Quite a lot in an incredibly synthesized, deep, comprehensive way. I guess I'd like to end with just giving you an opportunity to share about your blog or potential ways to learn more about you, or even in the future, possibly study with you.
My blog, my website is arthurkilmurray.com. The website has been going on for years and years and years, and I originally set it up as a resource for people interested in yoga and spiritual practice. There's a whole series of there's a 36 course self-study program. There's a lot of stuff on the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads and whatever. Just there's my own particular translation of the Yoga Sutras, all 4 chapters. And there's my ongoing blog, which is basically my teaching lessons to my students who are not around me. And it's a synthesis of what I've been teaching recently. So it runs back another 10 years or so. So, the class I was teaching 10 years ago when I was doing workshops or whatever, but I often teach the workshop and then put it all together and put it back to the students as a reminder of what they could work on. So the blog is an ongoing series of commentary and explorations on what I'm working with. Right now I'm doing a lot of work on Taoist practice in embryology. It's just a model for integrating the energy field of the body using what's called the microcosmic orbit, which is a circular component, which integrates the front body and the back body. We're going back to embryology, the endoderm and the ectoderm, which is the first emergence of the differentiated cells. And it's the foundation of Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine. From there, they developed the organ systems, the meridian lines. And I've been working with Taoist medicine for years and years and years. I've had acupuncturists, so I've been studying and working with it internally and personally. So I find it an absolutely fascinating model for exploration. It's a map. It's not the territory. The territory, you have to get in there and do it. It's not about an abstract, having all these words and ideas in your head. It's a map that says, go find this. Find these lines, find these organs, find these relationships inside. And it's just an encouragement for people to just get out and do it. Get on the mat, get on the floor, get out in the world and wake up, grow up and clean it up.
And hopefully there will be opportunities maybe after COVID to study with you in person, and maybe some online contexts.
I'm hoping to get I got to get the Zoom stuff down. I've been saying that for a long time, but I'm coming off 2 years of cancer therapy and my energy is still pretty low. So I have all these ideas, but literally just to get to the next level, I'm still healing. I'm still trying to rebuild my chi. And I'm feeling better, but it's a slow process. And I think the COVID in this particular cancer event has basically told me, slow down. This is not about it going out there and doing this as much as absorbing, listening, absorbing, listening, absorbing, listening, absorbing, listening. And then out of that will emerge something in the next year, 6 months, who knows? It's still a mystery. So.
Well, I don't think anyone could possibly tell you've been struggling with that based on your energy today. So thank you so much for this. It's really beautiful, and I think it will offer a lot to people who listen.
Thank you, Charlie. I love you deeply. You're such a delight and such a gift. And I love that you're getting the information out to the world.
Thank you.